Hi, I'm Amber Young.
And I'm Barbara Phillips.
And this is
Let's Talk EVM.
All right, to get us started, I have a disclaimer for myself and Barbara.
Yes.
And that is that all of the views that are expressed here are our own and are not the views of the United States government. All right, so with that, welcome back, as I say, or welcome, first timers. We are here to do a Let's Talk EVM podcast with an esteemed guest, John Driessnack. And our topic today is portfolio performance management. So first, hand it over to John to introduce himself.
Hi, well, I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to be here. John Driessnack, let's see. I have spent 21 years in the Air Force, mostly doing project and program and portfolio management. Did a lot of earned value, retired, worked for MCR, for Neil Albert and Company. People will know that name. And again, did a lot of earned value in scheduling and project management support and those kind of things. Went off to work for a management training company, Management Concepts, for several years, and then hung my own shingle in 2014. And that's been Old Stone Consulting since then, kind of working as a sole proprietor on whatever team will have me and kind of work some stuff. On the side, I've been a professorial lecturer at American University in the Key Executive Leadership Program, which is, you know, it's all about leadership in a lot of ways to get these things done. So I find that very fun to be doing at times. And then I've also done some research work and some classroom work at the University of Maryland in the Project Management Center of Excellence. And then the only other thing I think I'll mention is I've been on I was on the original PMI ANSI committee that wrote the what is now the ANSI standard for earned value management that came out in 2019. A lot of people still don't remember that EIA 748 is not the ANSI standard. So there is a PMI standard. And I think that's very interesting that PMI decided that was, you know, people sometimes will say, you know, earned values, you know, it's going away or it's really bad or this. Well, then why would the largest project management organization in the world with, you know, 1 million plus members or something, take the time to build an ANSI standard on earned value management? You know, so, and then I've been on the portfolio standard work. I've been in the program standard work. And so now I've been focusing a lot on portfolio management. And I think there's some thinking we have to do about performance management in that area, or you think about it as earned value in that area. What do we do at the portfolio level? Vice our traditional approach.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John. I thought you might also mention your role with the College of Performance Management, but perhaps that's for another day.
Yeah.
And your library. Maybe we'll give you a minute at the end to plug your library, okay?
Yeah, we'll come around.
Okay. So it sounds like the key question here is that portfolio management has really come of age. You know, it's not a new idea, it's not a new term, but now the data is, I like to say things like more, better, or just to be silly, but, you know, the data is so far superior than it was, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And John, so we want to know, is that enabling portfolio management, or do you think it's really just the scope of the way projects are fit together that has risen or elevated the need for portfolio management? And by the way, doesn't PMI have a cert? No, it's program management. What do they have a certain portfolio?
So PMP is the project management professional.
Right.
DMP is the program management professional. And then I like to say, if you want to be an F in program manager, then you are a PF MP, which is a portfolio management.
Okay, fair. Okay, yeah, I thought that. Yeah.
Which I am one. I am a effing programmatic person.
Are you alone in that, or do you have friends that also have it?
Oh no, I have a couple friends. It is expensive, because it has a whole different criteria. There is a test, but there's a whole different criteria for you to have. There's a board that looks over that. So there's a couple thousand portfolio management professionals. So it's not a large group, but it's one can look at it as being at the top of the pyramid.
Okay, I'm going to take a step back. I know, Barbara, you had a question, but I want to see, could we break down and define project, program, portfolio?
Sure. Right. So, if we use PMI, kind of notation, right?
You're breaking up a smidgen, John. You're like your voice. Yes, I think you should step forward. Yeah.
So project is a short-term endeavor, relatively, right? There's a start and a stop to a project. It starts, it stops. A contract can be a project. You're building something, you're designing something. It starts and stops. Programs have a little bit more life to them. There's a big discussion in the industry between product management and program management. I don't get wrapped around too much of the actual. So I'm going to have a program. So the Chevy truck, you could look at an industry as being, there's a program for the Chevy truck. It's going to last. It's going to have various different versions. You could look at each year as being projects to upgrade. This year's Chevy truck might have a long-term Chevy truck program going on, right? And then you would go up the next higher level to a portfolio level, which is a collection of projects and programs that have some purpose for the collection. And this where I will say there's a migration I think is also going on in portfolio management, where you have, if you Google out, you will find tons of references to project portfolio management, which is a collection of projects into a portfolio, like you have a collection of stocks. Your stock portfolio is a collection of stock. But there's also coming along what I'm going to call strategic portfolio management. Won't find many references to that, but I think it's coming up and going. The PMI standard for portfolio management's in review now. I'm on that review team, and I think there's going to be some discussion about the portfolio side, the strategic portfolio side, because in portfolio management, one of the performance domains is to have a strategic plan and for you to do value management. And so when you can look at a portfolio and say, oh, I want to have synergy. I want to have more than the parts. I want to gain more value. The reason I do a portfolio is so when I bring the 10, 20, 30, 40 things together, I can deliver more value than if they were all done separately.
What's that adage? The sum is more than the parts, or?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's synergy there. I like to call it synergy. And in fact, synergy was last in 25 when the program standard came out. Synergy was added as a principle in program management, right? In the performance domain that went along with that is collaboration.
Oh, very good. Right? Yes.
So at the program standard level, you have performance domains like strategic alignment. Your program is aligned with the portfolio's strategy. But you don't necessarily have a separate, you can have a strategy for your program itself or your project. But if you're in the hierarchy structure of and since we're in an earned value talk, let's go down one more. What is below a project? What's the lowest level of management? Oh, that's the control account.
Right.
So you have the control account to project, to program, to portfolio. And you can have portfolios that work for portfolios, you can have programs that work for programs, you can have projects that work for projects, or any combination thereof.
And I think this touches back to Barbara's question about data, right? And collecting the data and thinking about the management or the ways to view strategically what you're looking at within a portfolio or program. But I wanted to circle back to something I think is a little bit more as a start in a fun moment, which is a little bit of the history of control accounts. So I think you have a personal history there. Would hope to elicit that.
Yeah, so Barbara hinted to the library. What's the library? Well, my mother was a librarian.
Ah.
And of course, my father, who retired as a 3-star general, Hans H. Helmuth is the middle name, Hans Helmuth Driessnack, right? In the early 60s.
AKA Whitey.
Whitey, yes. Well, I give that away. His call sign was Whitey, right? He was a fighter pilot in the Air Force. So he basically in the early 60s, I was born at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. When he was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he worked on the C-141 program, and he was the chief of performance, measures in essence on there. I have to think about that. I'll have to think to myself as we go through this. I'll try to remember the exact name. And he managed basically the C-141 program schedule and how they measured it using PERT and PERT cost. Remember?
Now wait, let me dive into this story a little bit, John. So what's really interesting about this is that your father and the organization he worked for, they were the customers.
Yep.
So the customers in this case were managing the schedule for the project.
Yeah, there's an error. I have an error, and I sent it to you guys, and I'll post it out on my. I have a LinkedIn portfolio acquisition executive newsletter, so we'll put the link in somewhere, and I'll post the part.
Does that?
Yes.
Right. And so there's in that article where he talks about what he's doing, they're looking at, I think the chart says the 8-foot by 60-foot perch chart.
Oh, lovely. It goes around the room.
That's like wrapping around the room.
Yeah.
And there's literally the old thing where there's pins and strings and stuff like that.
I love that.
And that 8-foot by 80-foot, 60-foot, okay, PERT schedule came off an IBM mainframe. And the way I read the article, the IBM mainframe was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I like to tell people, when you think about it, as far as I know, there is no project server at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for any program office. So one could almost say like 60, what is it now? What are we talking about? Like 1962, 61? I'm 64 years old. So 64 years ago, there might have been more computing power to produce a schedule at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base than there is today.
Wow.
Now, in reality, you could do pretty good off a laptop or a desktop.
Sure.
Right. So that's the history. That's where it gets started. That's where he cut his teeth on this. And so then he goes up to Andrews, to Air Force Systems Command Headquarters, thinks about this a little bit. And I've got a carbon copy of a typed note, like old carbon paper on the typewriter. Sweet. My father did not type very well. Let me tell you, it was a 2-finger typer with a hand-drawn OBS to WBS.
Yes.
Okay.
Woo! That's awesome.
Here it is. And as part of this, Barb hinted the life. So I've created a nonprofit called the Gloria and Hans Driessnack Library. And the purpose of that is, and I've got Gary Humphreys is going to have a collection. Ray Stratton's going to have a collection. Paul Solomon's going to have a collection. Glenn Allman's going to have a collection. People who are interested in turning over their stuff.
Wow.
Digitize all that, turn it over so it's available for people. Because I think it's important that people understand historically, like where this stuff comes from and why it's good. And it's this control account discussion, 3 or 4 page discussion, that has really made me think now, what is the control account for the portfolio level?
Right.
I mean, we have to think about that. Like, is it just programs and projects underneath the portfolio? Is that what and then we go down the hierarchy, down that line? But wait a minute, if we are trying to follow strategy, this is where I did a little research at the University of Maryland, where we came up with the term multidimensional portfolio management.
Mm.
The idea behind multidimensional is you have different purposes for what you're doing. So if you're just managing the project or the program, that's cost, schedule, performance. But what are you trying to get out of that?
Right.
Portfolio stuff, like fighters, like if I think I'm an Air Force guy. So what is the now, right? Let's remember the program executive officer, the PEO, is no longer going to be called the PEO. Both in the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act for 2026 has changed that name to the Portfolio Acquisition Executive.
Mhm.
Secretary of War Hexstaff's memo of 7 November has changed that title. And so within 2 years, all the PEOs are going to be portfolio managers. And what I would contend is that is the movement of going from project portfolio management, a program executive officer who had a portfolio, which was a collection of programs, but there was really no baselining or measurement of the PEO.
Mm.
No baseline, no anything. The PEO could do a horrible job, a great job. There's no, but in the new scenario, the PAE, the Portfolio Acquisition Executive, there is going to be a portfolio scorecard, as they call it. Now, wait a minute. Whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah. What is that?
Sounds scary.
What is that?
Yes.
Is that earned value at the portfolio level? And now what does that mean? I think
Will there be metrics? Will there, what data, what elements? Where, how do you break it down? Is there a baseline?
right. In what are we measuring? Are we
Yes.
measuring cost, schedule, performance on the contracts that are rolling up, or to the individual project and program baseline? Or are we going to baseline a portfolio manager? If I would go read,
Leadership?
if I would,
Making leadership
Right.
responsible? Whoa, that's a new
Or-
fangled idea, John.
Or
so
if you had a control account equivalent for a portfolio, which would be under the portfolio, would you then have the equivalent of a CAM, a manager, a person at that level responsible for that control point?
right. So let me give you one example. One of the performance domains, like PMI has moved over the last, since 2017, when the last series of, when all three standards, project, program, portfolio came out all in 2017. The portfolio standard moved to performance domains. Now, program and project have also moved to performance domain. So it's a principle-based in performance domain kind of standard structure. Well, one of the performance domains is capacity and capability management at the portfolio level.
Okay.
So this is, what is the capacity of the portfolio and what is its capabilities? How much work can you do? So let's go back to the fighter PEO. How many fighter programs can you run at one time?
Okay.
How many programs of record can you run at one time? That's your capacity kind of question. And if we go back and look at something like the F-16, one of the oldest fighters we have, right? The oldest fighter. Well, we have F-15s, but let's look at the F-16s. It's the most fighter we have. Today, how many programs of record do you think there are on the F-16? We're building some new ones for foreign military sales. We are not building any new ones for the Air Force, but we still have, anybody want to take a guess? How many programs of record are in the system?
I wouldn't have any idea.
Uncertain. Uncertain.
There were 19.
Wow.
Oh,
Interesting.
19 years. What is it? Well, we're changing EW equipment,
right.
electronic warfare equipment. We're changing comm equipment. We're fixing things in the engine. We're fixing things on the stabilizer. I mean, there's a variety of things that are going on. So we're continually to modify and keep those aircraft modern, so they can communicate and deal against regular threats. So I like to think of the F-16 program manager really as a F-16 system portfolio manager. And that system, the F-16 as a weapon system, has 19 programs going on underneath it. And then when you look at any individual program, there's going to be contracts with the main vendor. There's going to be testing contracts. Those are like the individual projects that are going on.
Right.
So that structure's not a good structure. It's pretty good structure. So then you have those system portfolios. So what does the fighter PEO have? He has an F-15 system portfolio, an F-16 system portfolio, an F-22, an F-35, and now the F-47. There's 5 weapon systems that all fall under the general capability of fighters. There's another PEO for bombers. There's another PEO for like tankers, and then presidential executive aircraft, cargo aircraft, and then we have specialty portfolios. People who build all the special ops stuff, people that build all the electronic warfare stuff. The Navy does the same thing. The Army does the same thing. Frankly, if you dropped into Ford, let's go back to the Chevy truck kind of thing, right? The guy who's building the 1500 truck doesn't get to build his own engine. He's using a standard engine that's used across many different trucks. That's just like us having a portfolio manager for jet engines. We have the PEO for propulsion. It's different than the PEO for the aircraft. That's no different than in industry. I have someone building the Chevy truck, and then I have someone else building the engines, and you can buy different engines to go in that truck, right? It's the different options you would get, the different cabs, the different, radio systems. So someone's buying all the radios, someone's buying, figuring out other, right? So this is where we kind of came back at our research at the University of Maryland saying, this is a multidimensional problem. It's not a simple straight line problem. So when we get up to the portfolio level, we have to kind of think about, I've been in my head thinking about, well, how do we really want to measure portfolio? And I think we do want to do performance management. We want to do earned value, but I'm going to have a variety of value strategies in the portfolio. And some of that might be for that Ford truck, might be market share. It might be, decreasing the price of building the truck, or whether I'm going to go electric or not, right? Those are kind of the broader portfolio discussions, vice than the people who are managing a particular product line, like the 1500 or the 2500 or the 3500 truck, or the F-16, the F-15, electric or non-electric.
John, how
right?
does the central repository and the performance data that's being loaded into it supports portfolio management?
Yeah, I think the central repository is a very, very interesting thing. As much as people get frustrated about earned value, when you look across all the functional areas, systems engineering, logistics, finance, cost estimating, everything else, is there a standard cost estimating tool that all the cost estimates get delivered into a central repository and anybody can read them with a variety of different pieces of software? And the answer to that is no. There's not a common systems engineering tool, but the earned value community in creating, we've been the different XML files and everything else, but now we're at the IPM DAR
data
with the JSON file. We've got a standard scheduling and cost data set that then gets delivered to a central repository. That's really that to me is a leading best practice that the other functional areas need to think about going forward. That has been hard work over the last 20 years, The government's worked very hard with industry, with both like the College of Performance Management, as you mentioned, the NDI, National Defense Industrial Association's Integrated Program Management Divisions worked hard on that. The different functional or the different agencies, Department of Energy, FAA, NASA, the Department of Defense, have all worked to kind of work down this path and get coming. It doesn't mean we've still got Primavera schedules and Dell Tech Open Plan schedules and Microsoft project schedules and Saffron Risk and schedule, right? We have all these different commercial tools that are out there. That's all great. But you guys know, I mean, when I retired in 2004, it was practically impossible to move data with schedules and cost, right? That was very hard to do. Now, with the IP, very easy.
Right.
And so that, you think
about that. Is the term game changer come to mind, or is that too extreme?
No, I think as we move to portfolio management, and if as part of this scorecard requirement, we build a type of performance management where each portfolio manager, I mean, think of not necessarily the PAE, but think of the system portfolios underneath the PAE. Let's go back to fighters again. If the division head, which is what they're known as, there's a division head for F-16, there's a division head for F-15, there's a division head for F-22. All of those system division heads have a dozen or so programs. Where's the baseline for all of that, and where's the schedule that says where your product line is going from today to tomorrow out into the palm? Right. So if they built a schedule, a resource loaded schedule, maybe with not like we think of resources from an earned value point of view, but a resource loaded from the standpoint of what's in the budget, what's in the palm, what's in their cost estimate of what they plan to do, then, and that got sent to the central repository. Here's my vision of the world, is then if I'm a mission planner and I want to know what capabilities I have available for me, and if I want to change where I'm going to go, then when do I need to move from F-16s to maybe to F-35s to maybe to F-47s? How is that going to evolve over time? If I had schedules for when all the weapon systems capabilities are changing, you just think of what we could plan out and scheme, right? And the optimization. Yeah.
When we had a recent quick short, as we're trying to create another set of subset of our podcasts that are short, and we're trying to zero in on a topic, and we were zeroing in on what is EVM last week, and one of the things that came up was where the origins of earned value, and we were hearkening back to industrial engineering. And optimization, and that really is what this is all about. Like, how can we maximize, use our dollars and time effectively and efficiently? It's all the same stuff.
Yeah. So let me give you historically.
I think Amber's going to say something. Amber, were you want to?
Oh, we'll let John, and then I have a couple thoughts
right
to add here. Yeah.
You are exactly right on the industrial engineering part, because when my father went to AFIT at Wright Pat, before he went on that C-141 program, he in AFIT got given a book from 1956 called the Industrial Engineering Guide, all right, by Maynard. And I can show you, Dad would always say earned value came from the factory floor, because for 100 years, on the factory floor in recurring work, and this is where the term work package comes from, because on the factory floor, someone on a machine tool was given a work package and said, you have to build 100 widgets, and they would get and you got so much time to do that, and they would get measured on their 100 widgets, and that was a work package.
That's very easy to measure.
And that was a work package.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a work package. And that's why. So in that scenario on the factory floor, in recurring work, there are no control accounts.
Ah,
So that's an
interesting.
interesting thing, or what they were called back then, cost accounts. So cost accounts come together when you're now, because you have different organizations working on the same thing, right? This is where the OBS comes in. You didn't really need that on the factory floor because you weren't changing who the organization was going to be. It's the factory floor. That doesn't get changed very well. But I can tell you, and these are some things that I'm going to digitize and put up into the library, there are notes on schedule indexes and cost indexes for the factory floor in that Maynard book from
Oh,
1950.
that's so cool. That's really cool.
So those
Yeah.
are facts.
I would love to see the resource. Yeah, your library. It sounds tremendous. Okay, I have a couple things. Just going to throw them out. This is kind of entering Amber's amblings, and we did not do a Barbara soapbox. So, Barbara, if you'd like, maybe you can end. It's your choice. But I'm going to just do a couple thoughts, and then let you guys see if you want to join in on any of those thoughts, yes or no. And then maybe John, if you have any closing things we wanted to wrap up with. Okay, so I will go into my thoughts here. Firstly, I'm going to say I am currently getting ready for an IP2M meter environment assessment in the next couple weeks. And part of that is I have a homework assignment to read a book called Good to Great. We're going to be showing that by Jim Collins. And part of his intro, he did a major research study. It's a tremendous book as far as I'm on chapter 3, loving it so far. But he's talking about curiosity and how curiosity is just fundamental, right? For all progress, thou shalt have curiosity. And I genuinely agree with that. So I have a few points of curiosity in what you've been saying, John. And I hope that your newsletter, your LinkedIn newsletter, has the explorations towards that, or I can get more there, or you can answer some more here. So points of curiosity. Very interested in your multiple dimensions, what exactly you're thinking or going towards when you're looking at portfolio management. So what are those dimensions is really exciting. And then the other thing that was, I don't know, putting pieces together, you were talking about portfolio management and capability management. When you're talking about that, a lot of what comes to mind to me naturally is resource management inside of a schedule and looking at the distribution of resources, but really looking at it now in capabilities. And if you're talking about a baseline at the portfolio level, like a schedule at the portfolio level, and you're talking about that other types of value, what other types of, we have earned value against really scope. Really, if you look at that baseline, it's I would say it's against scope. Did you do the things you said you were going to do? What other types of earned value do we have? Earned value on capability, but how do you measure that? What does that mean? And then opening up to earned schedule and that whole concept, of measuring value earned against what. I think that's really exciting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where you go. And then one last point, you talked about control accounts and work packages. In my last year, I found a whole area where the concept of work control accounts also didn't really exist. And that primarily happened when in P6, if you take all of your P6 activities and import them into Cobra, Deltek Cobra, as a Cobra work package, it kind of blows out the idea of a control account or a work package. I'd say it's more of a work package that's kind of blown away. So that kind of was an interesting thought experiment we worked through last year. So just some things that I found curious. Pick and choose if you would like any of those, but I think I'll be monitoring and reading your newsletter closely.
Yeah, I won't say too much. I've lost a little bit of my skill about, I was trained on Primavera at one point, and I was trained on Cobra at one point, but I'll say my time is somewhat dated to be at that technician level to understand what's going on there. So the other ones that you talked about, on my quick topic again, what was the, go backwards.
Multiple dimensions and then the types of value. Yeah.
Okay, so the multiple dimensions, we'll talk about that just real quick. But what we were looking at is what we did in our research is we went to Michael Porter's value chain. So this is the interesting thing. So I think this is a good way to do strategy at a portfolio level. And you can have a portfolio on each one of the areas. You have your primary functions and secondary functions in a company. So if you think of the Defense Department, our primary function is not to do program management or to do contracting or to do financial management. our primary function is to develop weapon systems,
Right. The mission.
train, organize, and equip, right? In that sense. So you need to have a strategy about how are you doing in building those weapon systems. The secondary functions become important. So the primary functions went from the multi-dimensions go from what is the combatant commander's view of the world in doing the mission or the operation, to the capability of which, by the way, I will tell you, I like to tell people the F-35 has zero capability as a system that's delivered. It is incapable of doing anything.
It's a shell.
It's a shell. It needs a person to fly it. It needs maintenance officers. It needs logistic systems. It needs intel inputs. It needs a whole bunch of stuff. So that is done at the unit level. Well, I have a combatant commander, and then I have the unit that comes from the service, whether that be Air Force, Navy, Army, Marine Corps, whatever else. And then I come back into the program office who's building the weapon, the system manager who's building the weapon system, that then comes back to the last dimension is where's the technology driving you? We develop the technology, we put it into the systems, we put those into units, of action that can actually go do a mission with them. And then those individual units of action go into the combatant commander to run an operation. And that's really where we ought to be measuring. And none of that has to do with managing the contract, which is how we focus our value today, right? Which is very important, but the bottom line is the secondary function of the value chain. The military's value chain is to train, organize, equip in the services, and then go fight in the combatants. And so we need to start measuring that. And I think that's where we're evolving to, and it blows a lot of people's minds open because we are structured to focus on the functionals and the secondary functions, cost estimating, program management, systems engineering, and everything else, and not on our primary functions. When you look at Chevy, it's one thing, they're delivering a truck, is what they're doing, right?
Well, my comment would be, I really like that you focused again in on people. And I was reminded of James Carville saying famously during the Clinton administration, his advisor there, where he would always say, it all comes back to, it's the economy, stupid. People vote by what's in their wallet, And the thing about EVM and program controls is that those of us that get deep in it, we get wrapped around, the data for data's sake, and it's not about that. It's about information from the data that people use to make informed decisions or take corrective action. And I just think that can be a disconnect. Like you were saying, like we have all these systems we're so concerned about. And also just throwing surveillance under the bus, Sometimes when I've been party to that, I think now, okay, they flunked this test, but is that really reducing the data where a person can't make informed decisions based on it? And we get wrapped around, looking for things to that it's just only about the data, not about people using the data. And of course, Amber's already brought up IP2M meter, and they've cracked the code on it there. With the environmental assessment, it's all about the people. It's all about the culture. And
I think the IPM2 meter thing is a great thing. And I think that goes back to the portfolio level about capacity and capabilities. How well is your capacity and capability? How well are you doing cost estimating? How well are you doing scheduling? How well are you doing risk? And that is proven now when you look at that study that Arizona State did to having an impact on your ability to kind of deliver. But I'll tell you one thing. So I go back to this 1962 article in the C-141, and there's a little snippet in that article where Dad talks about they did basically hurt cost on all the things that were new. C-141. The things that were coming off the shelf, they did not do a development, like schedule and cost and everything. They didn't baseline. Like they kept that at a very broad level. I mean, I don't have all the details with it, but it's just discussed we're going to do detailed management on the stuff that's new, and the stuff that we've been doing for a while, we're just going to let that happen.
Why do you think?
Because I don't think there was enough value to put that extra management requirements on top of it. I think
EVM's on development work, not on operations. I think that's where it's
right.
going.
If you're on the factory floor, there's other things, there's ERP systems and other measurements to kind of do, right? This is earned values kind of really adds value.
I know in my personal experience with material management and the chaos of collecting performance data on that, when you got an MRP system, I was always like, that's not a priority. Let's put some long lead materials in your critical path, but we're not going to get performance data out of that that's going to be as meaningful as what you're getting out of your other system. Anyway, wrap up, Amber.
Yep.
Oh, all right. So with that, I think I also heard with the primary secondary conversation, the mind exploding, and then Barbara's game changer. So I think I'm hearing some of that too, John, in the way you're describing your portfolio performance management. So I'm really looking forward to more. If you want to give a little plug for where we can find you, your newsletter, so we can make sure we reference that. But if people just are on there and they just want to type it into LinkedIn, how do they find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn, John Driessnack, there's not too many of us. And then the newsletter is Portfolio Acquisition Executive. A little, as a closing tidbit, I look at the PAE as the birth of my baby, because back in 2018, 2019, 2017, I wrote a paper for PMI to the Section 809 panel saying you need to consider portfolio management. They agreed with that. They ended up hiring me to write the portfolio management chapter.
Wow.
In that chapter, when I was working with all the commissioners, Dave Ahern, Lieutenant General Ross Thompson, a variety
chapter of the PMBOK guide? Chapter of what?
No, chapter of the 809 report.
Oh, the 809 report.
Okay, Chapter 2 is a 150-page report on portfolio management. And number one in that was to change the PEO to portfolio managers and to call them portfolio acquisition executives. So it has been basically six to 7 years coming where that idea comes from. And so I'm very excited about that. So that the move to portfolio management is going down the way. I tell my PMI buddies that I work with in a corporate at PMI, see, you can make a difference, right? If you guys don't blow the government off.
Yes.
Because if we get the government moving down portfolios, that's gonna explode. I think my prediction will be in 5 years there will be 10,000 or more portfolio management professionals. A lot of it driven by the Defense Department moving to a portfolio structure.
Wow.
There's my prediction.
Wonderful. That's a great end. Yes. Wonderful. I think with that, we're going to close off and say thank you very much, John, for being here. And we are wrapping up. Any last thoughts? Barbara, soapbox, yes, no?
No soapbox today.
Okay, sounds good.
It's a holiday weekend. I haven't been focusing. But I do really want to try to sync up, and that's it from, and then really say it right. So let's say it really fast. Let's say it.
Okay, we're going to do this. Okay.
Ready?
Okay, you get us going. Go.
Okay. That's it from
Let's talk
EVM.